California. This is where the Fallout universe began, and honestly, it's the perfect place to start because California got absolutely demolished during the Great War. Los Angeles and San Francisco received multiple direct nuclear hits that transformed much of the state into a radioactive wasteland, with the Boneyard becoming a massive crater filled with the skeletal remains of skyscrapers. As Vault-Tec's operational headquarters, California contained the highest concentration of vaults in the country, including some of the most famous experiments in the series. Vault 13 was designed for 200-year isolation until a water chip failure forced the original Vault dweller into the wasteland, while Vault 15 housed people with drastically different ideologies that led to inevitable conflict and the eventual formation of both raider groups and legitimate settlements. Despite the nuclear devastation, California became the most successful post-war region in North America through the establishment of the new California Republic. Major settlements like Shady Sands, The Hub, Junktown, and Necropolis eventually formed the NCR around 2189, creating the first stable post-war democratic government with a constitution and territorial expansion. While California's recovery was impressive, the next state survived through pure technological superiority: Nevada. Nevada experienced the most unique situation during the Great War, thanks to Mr. House's sophisticated defense network that saved Las Vegas from complete destruction. House's platinum chip-enhanced systems successfully intercepted 68 out of 77 incoming nuclear warheads, allowing the city to survive relatively intact while the surrounding Mojave Desert suffered from nuclear fallout and infrastructure collapse. The state's 6 major Vault-Tec installations conducted some of the series' most diverse experiments, from Vault 11's horrific annual sacrifice requirement to Vault 21's gambling-based democracy and Vault 22's botanical research that created aggressive mutant plants. The Mojave Wasteland became a 3-way battleground between Mr. House's independent New Vegas, the NCR expanding eastward, and Caesar's Legion pushing westward from Arizona. New Vegas itself became a beacon of pre-war civilization, with House's Securitron army maintaining order while casinos, electricity, and clean water attracted travelers from across the wasteland. If you thought technological preparation was smart, the next state survived through sheer luck and then built something terrifying: Massachusetts. The Commonwealth survived the Great War largely by accident, since Boston wasn't directly targeted by nuclear weapons, though a single massive detonation in the southwest created the permanently irradiated glowing sea. The absence of direct hits allowed much of the city's infrastructure to remain standing, though social collapse was swift and complete in the weeks following the nuclear exchange. Massachusetts housed 5 Vault-Tec installations focused on social control and technological development, including Vault 111's cryogenic preservation experiment that froze the sole survivor for 200 years, and Vault 75's genetic selection experiments that secretly eliminated children deemed inferior. The region developed into one of the most complex post-war societies, with Diamond City built inside Fenway Park, the mysterious institute operating beneath MIT, and multiple factions competing for influence, including the Brotherhood of Steel, Minutemen, and Railroad. The Commonwealth's abundance of intact pre-war technology made it both valuable and dangerous, where the old world's sins continued to manifest through synthetic humans and corporate conspiracies. If you thought synthetic humans were concerning, wait until you see the government's most horrific experiments: Washington, D.C. The nation's capital suffered some of the heaviest nuclear bombardment of the entire war, with multiple direct strikes reducing much of the city to radioactive rubble that remained largely uninhabitable 200 years later. Strategic targets included the Pentagon, White House, Capitol Building, and major military installations, creating such intensive destruction that the area became overrun by super mutants and deadly radiation. The Capitol Wasteland contained 6 Vault-Tec facilities conducting some of the most disturbing experiments in the entire network, from Vault 87's horrific FEV exposure that created super mutant armies to Vault 112's virtual reality torture chambers and Vault 106's hallucinogenic drug experiments. The region became a dangerous, anarchic wasteland, dominated by super mutant armies and raider gangs, with the Brotherhood of Steel establishing their eastern headquarters at the Pentagon, while communities like Megaton and Rivet City provided rare safe havens. Project Purity at the Jefferson Memorial represented hope for regional recovery by providing clean water to the entire Capitol Wasteland. While this nuclear devastation was catastrophic, the next state faced an even worse biological nightmare: West Virginia. Appalachia was relatively lightly damaged during the Great War due to its lack of strategic military targets, with only 2-3 direct nuclear strikes hitting areas like the Huntersville military complex. Vault 76 served as one of the few genuine control vaults, designed to house America's best and brightest for exactly 25 years before opening on Reclamation Day. Despite minimal nuclear damage, Appalachia was devastated by something worse than radiation: the Scorched Plague, a crystalline infection spread by mutated scorch beasts that turned humans and animals into mindless, burning creatures. This plague effectively wiped out most human settlements within decades of the war, destroying the responders, free states, and even a Brotherhood of Steel chapter that had been established by survivors from California. The region became rich in natural resources and rare materials, but remained sparsely populated due to its hostile environment, filled with creatures that made radiation look friendly. But if you thought accidental plagues were bad, the next state deliberately engineered something far more sinister: Arizona. Arizona experienced selective nuclear targeting, with major cities like Phoenix likely being heavily bombed, while smaller locations like Flagstaff suffered less direct damage. Phoenix, as the fifth largest city in the United States, was probably burned to a crisp and left in the desert for 200 years, while Flagstaff's survival came from being cooler, having more water sources, and having significant pre-war infrastructure, including medical corporations and universities. The state became the core territory and birthplace of Caesar's Legion when Edward Sallow and Joshua Graham were captured by the Blackfoot tribe in 2247 and transformed them from a struggling group into a conquering army. Flagstaff became the Legion's capital city, eventually transformed into a massive fortress resembling ancient Roman architecture, with marble buildings, statues, a palace complex, and a functional nuclear power plant. Under Caesar's rule, the Legion conquered 86 tribes and formed the most powerful society east of the Colorado River, creating a militaristic empire that controlled all Arizona territory by the time of New Vegas. Arizona shows that sometimes the most successful post-war societies are the ones willing to embrace slavery and crucifixion. While this brutality was an organized conquest, the next state descended into chaotic tribal warfare. Utah. Utah experienced varied nuclear impacts, with Zion National Park remaining relatively untouched by direct strikes, preserving one of the few pristine wilderness areas in post-war America. The Great Salt Lake region became home to the Whitelegs tribe, while New Canaan was established as a Mormon settlement that would eventually face destruction. Vault 70 was part of the four states Commonwealth Vault network, though its specific experimental purpose remains limited in available information. Utah became a battleground between multiple tribal factions, with Zion National Park serving as the setting for some of the most significant post-war conflicts in the Southwest. The Dead Horses tribe allied with New Canaanite refugees led by Joshua Graham, while the Sorrows lived peacefully until forced into conflict by the Whitelegs tribe acting on Caesar's Legion orders. Depending on player choices in New Vegas, Zion either remained a peaceful refuge or became militarized territory where the Sorrows' innocence was lost as they transformed into a warlike people. If you thought tribal conflicts were messy, the next state became a battleground where major factions tore each other apart. Colorado. Colorado suffered multiple nuclear strikes, with Denver and other major cities being bombed, making it a priority target during the Great War. The state housed Vault 0, associated with the calculator's domain, and Vault 29, designed as a children-only experiment where no one above 15 years old was allowed entry. Denver remained in ruins and became controlled by Caesar's Legion as they expanded eastward, with Legion forces conquering the notorious Hangdogs tribe, who had formed unique bonds with the mongrel dogs overflowing from Denver's ruins. The state became a contested territory, with overlapping influences from Caesar's Legion, the Midwest Brotherhood of Steel, and various tribal groups. Caesar himself mentioned capturing Brotherhood members in Colorado, indicating direct conflict between Legion forces and Brotherhood operations in the region. Parts of Colorado also fell under Midwest Brotherhood influence, according to semi-canonical storylines, creating a complex three-way battleground. While this was a contested war zone, the next state became nothing more than a staging ground for someone else's ambitions. New Mexico. New Mexico likely suffered strategic nuclear strikes at military and population centers, experiencing typical post-war conditions of radiation and infrastructure collapse. As part of the four states Commonwealth Vault network, the state had at least one planned vault installation, though specific details remain limited. New Mexico became partially controlled by Caesar's Legion as they expanded throughout the Southwest, with the Legion systematically assimilating or destroying tribal groups according to their standard operating procedures. Legate Indulus of New Mexico was one of the Legion's regional commanders who was overseeing expansion into Texas during internal conflicts following Caesar's death. The state's position between Arizona and Texas made it strategically important for Legion logistics and military operations, serving as a crucial staging ground for territorial expansion. But this strategic importance was nowhere near as significant as the next state's massive military operations. Texas. Texas, as a large and populous state, likely suffered extensive nuclear bombardment, with major cities like Austin, Houston, Dallas, and San Antonio being primary targets during the Great War. The state has extensive planned vault construction with at least 10 total installations, including locations in El Paso, Dallas, Austin, Houston, San Antonio, and Corpus Christi, representing one of the highest concentrations of planned vaults in any single state. Texas became the operational territory of the Texas Brotherhood of Steel, a unique chapter that developed independently from the main Brotherhood organization, with major bases at Fort Alamo and Fort Worth. The Texas Brotherhood had access to the secret vault and utilized a vault prototype for their operations, giving them unique capabilities compared to other Brotherhood chapters. Various settlements emerged, including Carbon and Loss, while the Church of Lost Tech developed as a religious movement that worshipped Vault-Tec technology. The state's size meant different regions developed different characteristics, with some areas controlled by the Brotherhood and others contested by raider groups and settlements. Texas proves that everything really is bigger in Texas, including the post-apocalyptic problems. If you thought independent Brotherhood chapters were interesting, the next state became headquarters for a completely different kind of Brotherhood. Illinois. Chicago was bombed during the Great War, but some areas survived, though industrial areas suffered heavy damage that left the city dangerous even centuries later. Illinois contains Vault 1, though its specific experimental purpose hasn't been revealed, along with additional planned installations around Chicago and Springfield. The state became headquarters territory for the Midwest Brotherhood of Steel when a fleet of airships dispatched from California crash-landed near Chicago, with survivors establishing a new chapter that eventually went rogue and severed contact with the main organization. Unlike the traditional Brotherhood's isolationist policies, the Midwest Brotherhood began trading with locals and recruiting from the local population, making them more like the NCR or Legion with standing forces and territorial control. Chicago remained dangerous, with tribal villages scattered around the former city, while other settlements like Springfield became thriving towns that contributed to the Brotherhood's war machine, and Quincy received Brotherhood protection from tribal threats. But if you thought the Midwest Brotherhood was successful, the next state remained a dangerous wasteland. Missouri. St. Louis was heavily bombed and remained in ruins, while Kansas City was also likely affected during the Great War. Kansas City had been a large nuclear launch facility before the war, making it a likely location for vault construction. Missouri became part of the Midwest Brotherhood's operational area, but remained largely dangerous and sparsely populated centuries after the bombs fell. St. Louis became plagued by super mutants, raider gangs, and beast lords, making it one of the most dangerous cities in the Midwest. The beast lords were particularly unique as mutant cannibals who could telepathically control certain creatures, posing significant challenges to survivors and Brotherhood forces. Kansas City's nuclear launch facility staff somehow survived the war, but were transformed into ghouls who formed a town called Gravestone and developed a religious cult centered around the last intact nuclear bomb in their silo, which they revered as Plutonius. If you thought ghoul cults were disturbing, the next state became home to America's most brutal experiments on its own people. Pennsylvania. Pittsburgh wasn't directly hit by nuclear warheads, but suffered catastrophic environmental damage from highly irradiated rivers that combined with industrial pollution to create unique mutations. The contamination came from Abraxo, industrial-grade drain cleaner that expanded due to radiation exposure, creating the troglodyte degeneration contagion that turned humans into feral creatures called trogs. Pittsburgh became known as the Pit, ruled by rotating raider gangs using slave labor until the Brotherhood of Steel launched a massive operation called the Scourge in 2255. Ishmael Asher survived the Brotherhood assault and eventually emerged as Lord Asher, creating a slave-run industrial city that represented the only realistic hope for curing TDC and restoring the region. The Pit became notorious for its gladiatorial arena called the Hole, where slaves could fight for freedom, while the city's industrial output included weapons like the auto axe. The settlement created an ongoing moral dilemma, where brutal slave labor coexisted with the genuine possibility of regional recovery. But if you thought industrial slavery was morally complex, the next state became a hub for actual slave trading. Maryland. Northern Maryland was severely affected by nuclear fallout from the Washington, D.C. strikes, while isolated areas like Point Lookout remained less directly impacted. The state housed at least 2 significant Vault-Tec installations as part of the Capitol Wasteland Network, including Vault 92's experiments on musicians with white noise, hypnotic signals, and Vault 108's human cloning experiments. Maryland developed several notable settlements, including Canterbury Commons, which became a major trading hub where all 4 traveling merchant caravans would regularly meet. Paradise Falls emerged as one of the most notorious settlements in Maryland, serving as a slaver stronghold built around a pre-war shopping center dominated by a massive Bob's Big Boy statue. The slavers operated throughout the capital wasteland, kidnapping survivors and becoming particularly infamous for raiding Little Lamplight to capture children for the slave trade. Point Lookout remained unique with its swampland community featuring tribal swamp folk and mysterious conflicts involving pre-war scientists. If you thought slave trading was the worst thing people could do, the next state became a radioactive hellscape where survival itself was nearly impossible. Virginia. Northern Virginia bore the brunt of Washington, D.C. area nuclear strikes, making it one of the most heavily damaged regions in the United States, with numerous hot zones that remained dangerous 200 years later. Virginia housed Vault 87, which exposed residents to the forced evolutionary virus to create super mutants for military purposes, becoming the primary source of super mutant armies that terrorized the capital wasteland for centuries. The state became one of the most dangerous places to survive in post-war America, with most habitable areas quickly picked clean by desperate survivors. Despite these challenges, some settlements managed to establish themselves as part of the broader capital wasteland trade network, though Virginia remained largely a transit zone rather than a place where major communities could thrive. Northern Virginia areas like Arlington, Fairfax, and Loudoun counties became particularly dangerous due to their proximity to the D.C. strikes, transforming prosperous suburbs into radioactive ruins patrolled by hostile creatures and desperate scavengers. Finally, let's look at some of the more remote states that developed their own unique post-war characteristics. Remote states and territories. Montana remains largely unsettled wasteland with harsh mountain conditions, though some areas became part of NCR territory as the Republic expanded northward. Alaska was the site of major pre-war conflict with China during the Sino-American War, with Anchorage heavily fortified and likely bombed, leaving the state as a frozen wasteland with operational pre-war military installations. Oregon's northern areas were affected by fallout from California, but some settlements survived and became incorporated into NCR territory as the Republic expanded. Maine's Far Harbor Island was relatively isolated from direct nuclear strikes, with Vault 118 on Mount Desert Island, designed to study social class dynamics between wealthy hotel guests and working-class islanders before being derailed by RoboBrain research. Far Harbor itself became a unique settlement dealing with radioactive fog, synth refugees, and conflicts between humans and the children of Adam, developing its own distinct culture separate from the mainland. If you enjoyed this comprehensive guide to every Fallout state and want to see every Fallout faction explained, click the video on the screen.